Um, this meeting is recorded, which is excellent. So I'm going to be co-facilitating this meeting with my lovely colleague, Leora Wolf-Prusan. You guys have met her before. So she's been with me a couple times. And of course, I'm Lara Kane with ACES Connection. We're back to doing our Better Normals. We're going to be doing them twice a month instead of every week going forward, which will be exciting. And today, our mission, our goal is to have a good meaty discussion around the alignment and integration of trauma-informed approaches, SEL, different types of multi-tiered systems of support, and equity. How do they align? Do they align? Where do they intersect? Lots of questions. So these are, come on, computer, there we go. So first, Leora, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about NTech.
Sure. Hi. Good afternoon, ACES Connection family. I'm Leora, she, hers. Currently based in Los Angeles, but as you can see from the moving boxes, moving to the Bay Area next week back home. So if any of you are from the Bay Area, California, I'm coming back your way. We have met in so many different ways. The most recent way is that some of you heard me introduce another one of our projects called the School Crisis Recovery and Renewal Project. It's the same face, same name, different hat. So today, it's like in one of those makeover shows. Today I come to you through a very new project called NTAC, the National Training and Technical Assistance Center for Child, Youth, Family, Mental Health. And I'm going to put the website in the chat box. If I could just get a asterisk in the chat box. This is me doing an asterisk in the chat box if you are familiar with the term systems of care. Put an asterisk in the chat box. If I say systems of care, you're like, know it, get it, have heard of it. Okay, we got 1, 2. All right, Brian, Judith, Tanya, Jean or Jeannie, Bill, cool. Okay, helpful. So that means that there are, so many. Maria's like, not only have I heard of systems of care, I can teach the thing. Great, excellent. So some of you have heard of systems of care and some of you have not. All good. What I would like to offer is that systems of care was a term created about 20 years ago by children, by family and youth advocates. And please, for the SOC experts in the room, chime in the chat if you'd like to add or correct. But 20 years ago, the term SOC was created to really advocate for children and family and youth to be partners and advocates for young people who had serious mental illness or who experienced serious emotional disturbance, SED. So SMI and SED. And the idea was that we really wanted the mental health system and school system and juvenile justice system, the criminal justice system, all the systems that are in the constellation that a child or a family interacts with if they're experiencing mental health distress, to be aligned and in partnership and to be strength-based and trauma-informed. So that's the systems of care idea, right? So we are a new TA center, open nationally, completely no cost, to continue to advocate for that vision. And I'm coming to you, and so you can learn more about us on our website. I'm coming to you as a school-based services lead. And Lara and I are here today because one of the biggest barriers for schools in that constellation of systems partnering is that oftentimes schools use a lot of acronyms within their own sites or with partners. They use acronyms because those are acronyms of different initiatives and movements. And it's often hard to partner or collaborate or find intersection when we're not necessarily understanding the same language or when I say trauma-informed and Lara says trauma-informed, how do we know that we're actually saying the same thing? So our collective goal today, the vision, is that Lara, myself, and a couple other folks, we want to create a visual to support systems to be able to partner for children and youth. I might sneeze in 2 seconds. It went away. to partner for children and youth, and for us to have a visual that maps out and illustrates how trauma-informed social emotional learning and leadership, equity, and multi-tiered systems of support work with each other, and also how they do not work with each other, so that we can use it as a tool to bridge and build connection.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Great description, Leora. Good job.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I think, having done a lot of work consulting with schools over many years, you all know that this often comes at schools as individual silos of programs and practices, right? Now we're doing SEL, now we're doing trauma-informed, now we're doing MTSS, now we're doing PBIS. Oh, and we have to be equity focused and anti-racist, right? And so schools have a very hard time understanding how these all come together in a systems perspective. And that's very frustrating for them. And it's frustrating for me trying to work with them, right? Trying to help them see this as a whole. And so I was very, very excited about this proposal, because I do see how in so many ways they intersect and where they don't. And, and I think of being able to create some sort of visual and a brief and like tools will help us achieve our goals, our collective goals, to have these things happen in positive ways. The more we can help schools see them as integrated, the better for all of us in our endeavors. So these are kind of some of the big ideas that Leora and I came up with as we were thinking through this, around how to frame this question. So why are schools doing all of these things? Why are schools and programs trying to achieve this? What are the central outcomes that they're looking for? Another way to think about it is, what is the big idea in the heart of it? What is the North Star of all of these acronyms, right? Where do they Venn diagram together in terms of the big why? Why do schools want to do this work? What are they after? And then we won't get through all these questions today, but I want to make sure to share them with you so that you know kind of what we're thinking. What resources have helped you to understand both the intersection and the difference? Share those with us if it's helpful. What misunderstandings do we want to interrupt? And who might be harmed by integrating these approaches, how and why? So for me, it's really the two essential ones that I want to dig into today is what's this North Star? What's the big idea? That's what we're going to talk about first. And then this last one, the last two really, what misunderstandings exist and what do we need to be cautious of, who might be harmed by the work, and what do we need to look out for? And first I wanted to start with just grounding us. Like Leora said, there's so many definitions, and these aren't the like end all be all either. These are just ones that we're offering up for consideration. And I'm not going to completely read all of it. You guys can look at it, but basically thinking about a strengths-based approach in a school system that focuses on school and educator wellness, both for students and for adults, and emphasizes safety, all the kinds of safety, right? Physical, psychological, emotional, and really thinking about a strong foundation of support. So that's one way to consider this trauma-informed approach. And I think there's a way, Jenna, you can tell me if I'm completely lying, for me to send you this PowerPoint, all the participants later, because I'm happy to share.
Yeah, we can share it afterwards.
Yay. Okay, good. I'm never sure what. Okay, there's two. So equity, this was one of the definitions offered, and I love that it includes a quote from Paul Gorski, because if you haven't become familiar with his work around equity in schools and trauma-informed care, I encourage you to do so. And he talks about the 4 skills of equity literacy: recognizing inequity and bias, responding to inequity and bias, redressing inequity and bias, and cultivating equity. And it's also recognizing that it's not the same as equal, right? It's not the same as, it's that folks are getting what they need, and sometimes that's different. Anything to add to those two, Leora, before I move forward?
Just wanted to make sure that we're citing and we're acknowledging. So all the text in the blue comes from Shay Martin and other incredible teachers at Liberate and Chill, and I will put that in the chat box.
Thank you, and I'll add that to the slides too before I send them out. All right. And anti-racism and anti-bias work, or ABAR. And I appreciate that this particular definition really talks about acknowledging the racism and bias that can be at the core of our system and how it was built, but also working to disrupt that system with strength-based goals of equity and justice, and looking at a community-wide approach. And of course, Leora, jump in here anywhere. SEL, and again, I recognize that some of the folks that come to this meeting are from other countries. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to make sure that I put these in here, because not every country has, MTSS as a lingo that they're working with, or SEL necessarily in the same way that we frame it. So SEL, many of you familiar with, working on social emotional skills, and I think it's important to work on SEL, like adult SEL, right, and student SEL. So focusing on both of those things. And I like that this definition in here, at the end is, it doesn't just complement trauma-informed practices, it is a trauma-informed practice in and of itself. So helping us to see that within a bigger umbrella. They really go well together. Okay, MTSS. Leora, I don't know if you feel up for this one. Any overview that might be helpful?
Yeah, so just super quickly, so that I don't MTSS explain to y'all, MTSS is a multi-tiered system of support. Some people call it an approach, some people call it a model, some people call it a program. It is a way in which school communities and services to support students both preventatively, interventively, to get supports. And one of the main ways that the model asks of us to think about support is in tiers. So many of you have seen, if we talk about like what image comes to you when you think of school mental health, oftentimes people think of the triangle, that there is a large, what are the ways in which we want to support all students, no matter what? What types of needs do some students need that are more specific? And what students need even more supports that go sometimes and often outside the services that we can provide at school that require us to partner with clinical or sometimes other interventions. And what we don't want is to have labels of students that are red, yellow, green, tier 1 students, tier 2 students, tier 3 students. We just want to think about what services support all, what services support some, and what services support even more specific needs. And sometimes MTSS is translated into the positive behavior and intervention supports world, PBIS, and sometimes into the response to intervention world, but it's all under the umbrella of multi-tiered systems of support. And I will mention that as we heard in the trauma-informed care definition, I hope that all of you caught that educator wellness is explicitly named in that definition of trauma-informed care. And there is a movement and a call to action in MTSS to name school staff also as part of the whole school community in tiered supports, and revisit MTSS with a lens of equity, which is actually, by the way, the call for all of these initiatives. Like, how do we continue to be explicitly anti-racist so that we're not trauma-informed without being racially just? We're not providing multi-tiered systems of support if we're not coming at it from a trauma-informed or racially just lens. So just wanted to pause there.
Absolutely, thank you so much. And yeah, just really, for me, what stands out in these triangles, right, is that bottom tier and the idea of being preventative. and serving as many in that universal approach as possible. And I think about that with trauma-informed approaches as well, right? Really focusing. I think that's a big opportunity for us to see these coming together is in that preventative space. And then PBIS, because it is mentioned in both, both some of these other definitions, I want to make sure to include that in there because not everyone may be familiar. And I think this is, from my perspective, one of the ones that gets called out the most as being problematic in integrating in with the others. But I'm really excited to hear what you guys think. But it is very, very common approach to positive behavior supports across school systems, and again does come at that very universal preventative lens. Anything to add to that, Leora? Okay, so those were just the overview, so that we had some shared understanding of where we were coming at this work. And I think the first thing I want to do is first ask you to add in the chat, is there anything that you would like to contribute to that language or add? Please put it in there. And then we're going to move into this first discussion around those ideas that we just presented. What is the North Star of all those acronyms and approaches? That's the first point of discussion. So I'm going to have Jenna break you guys into groups of 5. Let's see what time it is. And then we will spend probably 10 to 12 minutes at least on that. So be mindful when you get in your group, quickly introduce yourselves to each other if you don't know each other, right? Of course. And try to make sure everyone gets a quick share, even popcorn style, like what words are coming in to your head when I ask you, like, what's the central North Star of all of these? What's the core? And then if someone could take note of what you guys come up with, because when we come back, I'll ask you to share what you come up with in the chat. Can we get a list of the acronyms? Great. Yes, so MTSS or /PBIS /RTI, right? And trauma-informed approaches. I will send this in just a second. I'm just talking out loud, of course, as I type. SEL, and then equity isn't an acronym, but the other part of it. So those are the big ideas. So in those 4 big ideas, what is the central North Star? Why are schools doing those approaches? What do they want? Who does it serve?
Can I add one piece, Laura?
Yes, of course.
I'm doing that anyway because I unmuted myself. The other invitation is that we are offering 4 main initiatives, right, with equity as both a capital E and lowercase e. So sometimes equity can be the initiative, sometimes it is an informal initiative, sometimes it's explicit. I would not be surprised if in your small groups you also surfaced 80 other million acronyms that your school communities are also engaged with. Restorative practices, restorative justice work. So my invitation is for you to just hold on to those, to concentrate on these only. We're not saying that these are the only things that school communities are engaged with. We know there are others, and we know they're important to name. But if you can hold those in a parking lot or bike rack and concentrate on these first, that would be my.
Yes. Exactly. Great. And that answered our last question in the comment. Thank you so much. All right. Jenna, if you guys, if you can, and Jenna, once you put them into groups, can you type in that question of what's the North Star of those acronyms and send it out to the groups?
Yep.
Thank you.
Everybody should be getting the invitation to join their group now.
And I'm going to stay here.
I feel like I'm a teacher that I handle things pretty well. Like things just kind of bounce off me and I'm like, fine. And I can deal with that. It's not so easy this year. And I know there are a lot of teachers that are worse off than I am. And how do we expect them to be there for their students if we can't be there for ourselves? There you go.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you for starting us off. And that's always, yes, if we can't be there for each other and ourselves, how are we going to be there for our students? That's always the most important message that I want people to think about. All right, groups. So I think we had 5 groups out there. So I would love for people to share what were the main takeaways from your group about why, what's the center? Why someone said, this is really all the same work. Why? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
We were
Great,
group
Lisa.
1. We were group 1 and I was taking the notes. We were just saying kind of the North. First of all, we were trying to understand like what is meant by North Star. And yeah, so I guess what we said, educators have goals, mental health people have goals. We all have different goals, but what is that guiding principle that we're all working toward?
Exactly.
And we kind of talked about, meeting students where they're at. And like Mark was saying, building relationships, that if you don't build relationships, you have nothing. And then we had a really interesting conversation, but we also started talking about how hard it is sometimes for people to build relationships with kids if they've suffered their own trauma or if they've experienced their own trauma. And that if you don't have a relationship with the family or a kid, if you're not culturally competent about that particular family or kid, then you really don't have a right to try to jump in and save them or intervene. That you need to establish trust and relationship first. So we talked a lot about building relationships. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else in the group. We talked about Turnaround Schools Network. We started talking about that at the end. The whole child was a theme that we kind of see as the North Star. Yeah, that's the overview.
Great. Love it. Thank you. All right, next group. Who wants to share?
Our group was, I don't know what group number.
That's okay.
They were groups 5. Michael, go ahead.
All right.
We had a good group. There was a lot of the topic was about collaboration, making sure people understood what SEL was, what trauma informed was, making sure there's communication among teachers with the kids. I gave an example of kid. We have 4 classes, we have semesters, and kid passing my class, but he's failing all other 3. And, I asked the kid, well, why are you passing my class and you're failing the other 3? And a lot of it was the teachers don't know how to talk to the kids. The kids feel like they're being talked down to. And I agree, because I hear it sometimes. Let's be honest, there's sometimes kids are getting triggered because it's intentional sometimes and unintentional other times. And I think teachers communicating and actually knowing also what SEL is and what being trauma informed is and having a perfect mix in there. A lot of the times I presented to my school about a one-word initiative, and I mixed in some of my story. I'm a motivational speaker, high school teacher, 9 through 12. And a lot of people didn't even know what ACEs were. They heard of it, but they didn't actually know what it was. And when I normally speak, I'll give the ACE test out. I didn't have time to give it to the teachers, but I know a lot of the teachers, like someone mentioned here, are dealing with their own trauma. And sometimes they treat the kids how they were treated when they were a kid. And you gotta be careful with that, because I'll give you an example. I had this teacher contact me about were having issues with a student in class. Well, the teacher was writing on the board, I'm retiring in 700 days, and then would drop it down. Well, they're having a problem with 2 of the kids in the class. I said, well, did you ever ask the kid what happened to them? You keep on saying, I don't know what's wrong with this kid. I said, sit the kid down and ask them what happened. Lo and behold, both of these kids, two separate kids, they live in a household where the parents are telling them the days they got left in the house. So when they go to the teacher's class, they envision the teacher as being the parent. And when the teacher wiped it down off the board, apologized to the student, yes, teachers should be able to apologize to kids because they're not perfect. And sometimes the teachers are worse than the damn kids, you know? But I think that being trauma informed is a huge thing. Understanding what SEL is and how to mix it in. It doesn't matter if you're a math teacher or a music teacher, you can have it in there and it's got to be a perfect thing. But that's what we were talking about in ours. And somebody else can add something in if they need to. But teachers also collaborate. What works well with one kid, every kid is not the same. You know, every kid is a specific one. I tell kids all the time that every kid's like a gift, man. They just need to be opened up, and you got to listen to kids with your heart, with empathy, right? With your ears, your eyes, and your heart.
So Michael, I think the piece that I'm seeing head nodding, the piece that I'm going to ask for either your group or all of us together to do some work around is when I hear you say like, yeah, we got to do SEL in there, we got to do trauma informed in there. Like how, if you are meeting someone who's new to a school or new to a district and you want to describe to them all the different things that are happening and what they all have to do with each other. What's the visual or the metaphor that you might use, or the like 1 to 2 sentences, so that we can start to bridge our colleagues' understanding? That's the ask right now for us to start to think about, right? Like, how do we message and advocate in a way that lands with people and that's authentic to the work that we're trying to do?
So
I would hope that new person doesn't see I have 700 days left until retirement, because that sends a very negative vibe.
Yes, heard. Thanks.
So I was in this group, and I think one of the things I recognize right away is that I have not practiced for 5 years. I'm a consultant in trauma-informed care and all this other kind of stuff in schools. And so when Michael and Cynthia were talking, they were talking as someone who's right in the school, and then connection came out as the thing that's most important. So somehow that has to be, in collaboration, somehow that has to be part of our North Star, because that speaks to people who are in the school. For me, as I'm trying to figure out how to explain it to people, I see the trauma-informed piece as the lens through which everything is done in the school. I don't know if that makes it the North Star or not, but my reason for saying that is all of the other things that you can use to teach PBIS and SEL and using RTI Center and everything else. If you don't do that in a trauma-informed way, it falls on deaf ears, just like the teacher who thought she was worried about the students in her class and yet was completely unaware of the impact of her behavior on them. And to me, that's the lens and so I use the trauma-informed principles as a tool to get me there. So whatever you're teaching, if you're teaching history or Phi-Ed, or you're working as the nurse in the office, or you're teaching SEL, or you're teaching behavior, or whatever, you're doing it in a trauma-informed way. And I could go on because I've also thought about MTSS as the framework that you fit it all into. But maybe it's too complicated, and maybe that doesn't resonate with people in the field. So.
Thank you, Pam.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
I've got a little bit of a different spin on it. I see as school and whatever we do in schools, we bring in a lot of initiatives into our school, because what we're trying to do is to make education as conducive, the environment in our schools as conducive to as best possible to improve learning for our students, and so it's to create a conducive environment for education, which means it's that, but it also means, like what Pamela said, to have the lens of being trauma informed. But the lens of trauma informed is not only just in schools, it's everywhere. Schools is something specific, and teachers go into schools to teach children. And what we all know with anything is that we go into teaching to create good relationships with our children, with our parents, and with each other, so that we improve learning and education. Because we don't do that in health. Health isn't about conducive learning so much, it's about health outcomes. So when I started teaching, I believed I would be always working with children, and I would be engaged in learning and teaching and learning, and I would be engaged with those children. But very slowly I learned that the focus wasn't about engaging with children and learning, it was engaging with my planning book, and with planning and assessments, and with sitting on a computer and doing all this paperwork and all this other stuff. And then very slowly I realized that children were right down at the bottom of the pit, not right there at the top. And that's what's really sad about education, that now we're inundated with a whole lot of other stuff. And really what we should have been working on right along was building our relationships all along. And if we had had really good relationships, we would have been better off prepared for when COVID came along, because those relationships would have been already embedded, but they weren't. So now it shows up because of COVID. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and so I think that's, you're right though, keeping kids at the center of the work is what I'm hearing, from a lot of that. Is there a group that we haven't heard from before we get into the next question?
Well, we sort of came up with a list of those North Star words.
Great.
Like prevention, basis for success, removal of barriers, resources to overcome, inclusion, relationship and community. And then one of our group members talked about describing it like a Venn diagram with the child in the middle and all the other things overlapping like petals. We got into a fairly lengthy discussion about PBIS and how maybe that doesn't always fit. And then we also talked about restorative practices and restorative justice and where those fit.
Excellent. Thank you.
But
Leora,
again, the relationship piece was huge again.
Yeah. Relationships. Leora, do you have anything to add? To our question for clarification at the moment. Sorry, Leora, did you hear me? Oh, I said, do you have anything to add right now?
No, I just was told by the internet that I was unstable, so I was waiting to go live.
Okay. All right.
Favorite message of 2021, yes. I think the piece, like I'm just going to continue to drive us into thinking about the way that we're communicating and advocating, because I'll just be explicit. In my experience working with state systems, using the terms relationships gets us someplace, but it doesn't get us all the place, because there aren't a lot of folks who will say, I don't believe in relationships. The way that they act, the way that it shows up is a different story. But I'm going to ask us to think about, like, literally explicitly, how do the initiatives like fit visually or pack on? And I saw someone write in the chat box, bumper stickers, right? If you're trying to give someone shorthand, because yes, of course, yes, you're right. North Star is about relationships. And if that was the case, then why do we need 5 and not just 1? Why not only do trauma-informed care? Right? That's another way to think about it. Why not only do SEL and not MTSS, for example? Yeah, Brian.
Hey, team. So I guess I'll kind of answer your question in one way, is that I think the North Star is the child. Whenever we do any of our planning, we put the child in the middle. first and foremost. And I guess I'll sort of unpack it by saying something simple as, in my role as consultant, MTSS, PBIS, this is what I do, Tier 1, Universal Social Emotional Program. I've showed up at campuses that are all those things without knowing the alphabet of it, right?
Yes.
They operate with the child's well-being as the central decision-making factor in how that particular site actually partners with their district office. And there's so much variance within this landscape. Functionally, we get a little mired in the framework language. And most recently, what I've come to understand through appreciative inquiry is that there are sites that are always on the right track, and yet there's a communication lens that's problematic because of how it occurs to the educator at the site. And so some of my summative language is, you are this web of care. I'm just a guy who gets to leave in a little bit, but whatever systems of care you implement and start need to be held, honored, and understood by those practitioners. And there becomes this tension between compliance versus sort of this more humanistic approach, because our awareness through trauma-informed, our awareness and sort of consciousness outstrips the pace of systems change. And there's a functional brake system within that. And so I think I only say that in service to the idea that I think MTSS for me is really the marrying of PBIS concepts, which I'll be honest, I use a consulting paradigm called PBIS Evolved because it is more behavioristic in my personal opinion. And then sometimes we're using more behavioristic paradigms for behavior. You can't punish someone into healing. So as we reconceptualize what's being asked, and as educators evolve this awareness to make them learning ready, right? As Adriana was saying, there's a breakdown of sort of system speed and awareness of change, because a lot of folks are already doing it by any other name. And so I think I just like to honor the wisdom of the sites who've been doing it, and know it's hard to integrate new awareness into existing systems. So just kind of, I don't think I really said much else, but keeping the student first, we can then filter in and interpret what is working well into the language that's being presented, if that makes sense. PBIS, MTSS, but I sort of focus on the why first, and usually it's all there by any other name.
Love that. Love that. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. 5 minutes left. I hate this. So I think, obviously, we won't have time for another breakout, but I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion. I think we will continue this the next time we meet, and try to, even with new people that come, and keep diving into some of those. And I think what you just brought up, Brian, because that's also my experience, is that I've been to many schools that are trauma informed, but have no idea what that means. But you walk in and you're like, oh my gosh, this place is all the things, right? And what are they doing that makes it all the things that we're trying to facilitate with these different approaches that may help other schools come on board to this more humanistic way of seeing education, I guess. Leora, what thoughts have come up for you?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a conversation to be continued. And I will say that from many, many folks' perspectives, there's resonance that it doesn't matter what you're calling it, as long as it impacts young people in a way that is positive and revolutionary for them and their family, and for the person providing. So we should have probably said that from the jump, Lara, like if you're using TIC, SE, et cetera, good. And also there is still a need, especially because I think someone put in the chat box, in loving kindness to the educators and administrators who are working incredibly hard now and always, that it's actually an act of care to support really clear language about how things align with each other, so that we don't we don't stress out folks, right? That we don't So this is actually, and again, this is helpful for me of like the frame, that it is an act of us wanting to be intentional, kind, and clear to then minimize and reduce stress and feeling of overwhelmation, which is not a word, but it should be.
Like it. Exactly. I mean, that what you just said summed up what was going through my head, right? Like, yeah, Rita, mindset, heart set. Like this is why I was so excited about this endeavor that we're embarking on, is that desire to reduce the stress on people that are trying so very hard to create amazing environments and trying to, I was talking to a teacher who said, I have been trained in all of these things, but no one has ever asked me to think about them as a whole. She's like, and her head was like, you know, she was like, imagine if we started the conversation this way, rather than having it all come at us separately where we get stressed out, resentful, pushback, right? But if we could start the conversation with what's at the center and then figure out how of these different things, these different ways of doing things support that desire, the heart of it. So anyway, that is, and like Rita, like you said, this idea of positive culture, right? It is that, but what does that mean? How do we get there? I love everything that you guys are putting in the chat. Thank you so much. This is so helpful. And that's why I had a feeling, I was like, an hour is not going to be enough, but we're going to start anyway. There's so much to talk about, and I really want to continue this conversation the next time we meet, if that's all okay with all of you. And we can get into it and see how this evolves. I am going to be working with, as Leora and I continue on this project, we're going to be working with a graphic facilitator. You know, they'd make these amazing visual representations of conversations. So she's going to be listening to the recording of this conversation, plus joining another meeting we're having. And that's going to be an evolving piece as well. And if we can create some kind of amazing visual, we'll share it with all of you. That will kind of help to illustrate in a visual way what all of this conversation is. And that I'm excited about. So yeah, that's part of this. And Jenna just reminded me, we will be changing the time. We're going to experiment with changing the time of our meetings to 4 p.m. Pacific for a while, because I really want to give the opportunity for more teachers and administrators to attend. And having it in the middle of the day has been a challenge for them to be able to join us. And so we kind of did a survey and there was about half and half. So we're going to try, and I'll send out a blog post, but with the next date and the time. But I just wanted to let you know, we're going to experiment with that and see if we can broaden our participation a little bit. All right. Any last shout outs, comments? I know some of you will have to get off right away. But I will be here for a few more minutes if anybody has any last things to add. And we appreciate all of you. Shannon, was that a hand raise or bye? Oh, that was a bye.
I wanted to add something.
Yes.
I placed in the chat box what the North Star is, and a lot of people don't know what the North Star is. I know in my area we have a North Star charter school, but when you sit down and you really understand and conceptualize what the North Star really did, I placed in the chat box, from a biblical standpoint, the North Star guided people. And that's what we do as educational professionals. We guide our students so that they can reap optimal education that will enable their success. So to understand what the North Star does and what it signifies should guide you in creating meaningful interventions that will ultimately assist the child.
Yes.
So it's always about the child. You're guiding the child as an educational professional.
Oh, thank you so much. And this was such a great reminder to me. I walked into a meeting assuming that people understood what I was asking, right? Without clarifying what the North Star was. That happens to me all the time. And so it was a great reminder, like, oh, right. What do we mean by North Star? And that's
Right,
what you said is exactly what I was intending, right? What guides us when
right,
we decide, when we're trying to decide whether something is a good decision, a bad decision, the right initiative, the wrong initiative, whatever. What is that core values that we hold at the center that guide us in the right, keep us focused in the right direction. So thank you so much for adding that in.
right. Absolutely.
That. Anyone else? I've got time, but I want to be mindful of your all time. But if anyone else really wants to join in, I'm still recording, so our graphic recorder will get all of this part of the conversation as well.
Well, I think the last thing I was struck by as she articulated her interpretation of North Star was also the invitation to reconceptualize how we think about education and what the goals are.
Right.
A gentleman by the name of David Militzer, who I met at Vision 2020 conference, he works at the California State Department, but he said, wouldn't it be nice if K-12 education sort of only was hovering around two essential questions? One, helping children answer two questions. One, who am I and who could I be, right? As we start to look at what the function of education is within our society, hey, Judith, those two dimensions also kind of help shift our frame and how we interpret the alphabet soup that's coming at us, and is that in service to our larger, more sustainable goals and sort of more revolutionary underpinnings. And as we start to try to deconstruct systems that actually scaffold and support and perpetuate systems of disproportionate access and equity, I think there's also a deeper question on what and how do we see the role of education in these larger global social justice awareness building initiatives, and that becomes scary territory, I think, for the people where change directly affects them and disrupts them. So it's even a disruptive inquiry at a certain level if you're really doing the thing right, because you don't need the systems and structures just to love up some kids and make agreements internally and do the work. So there's something to consider there, I guess I'd say.
I think though too, Brian, it's important that we remember that what happens to the child just doesn't happen in our classroom. They leave that classroom, they go to the office. How did the people in the office treat them? What skills do they have? What perceptions are they using? And so a teacher can be very much about whole child and the child, but are the systems and the policies and procedures, are they aligned with all of these things? And is that how we treat their parents? Or do we just see, so I'm sitting here thinking a lot about what everybody's saying about making sure we have that whole child in the middle, but what does that say about that system and how that system has to change? So you're right, a teacher can do it on their own, and that's why kids have always done really well in certain classrooms with certain teachers and not in others. But how do we effectively make it so that they can do well everywhere?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to add too that you're right, because most people associate the main office, the principal's office, from a disciplinary standpoint. But again, when you go back to what the North Star signifies, the North Star was, in addition to serving as a guide, the North Star is also the brightest star in the sky. So when you look at our children are bright, and they're various gradations of brightness. And as educators and school support staff, etc., we have to bring that out of a child. We have to encourage a child to shine bright. I mean, Rihanna made the song "Shine Bright Like a Diamond," and our children are all bright. And what makes the sky so beautiful is because we have a whole bunch of stars. And if you translate that into to an education standpoint, we have a bunch of stars, and not everybody is cut out to be a Rhodes Scholar, to be Ivy League. And every child's talent is different. Everyone's ability is different. And it is our responsibility to accentuate and encourage that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Sorry, my cat is trying to attack my computer.
I love that story, Brian, that you brought up. I use that all the time about the animal school.
Yeah. And again, I think there are some amazing examples of schools that have been around 30, 40 years that understand that in their assessment, in their structure, in how they behave, before a lot of these initiatives existed, right? So how do we continue to spread that beyond just a few continuation schools or alternative schools or progressive schools, right? They're in pockets. And so how do we help systematize, like Pam was saying, how do we encourage the blossoming of those ideas across more entrenched systems is part of the thinking around this, for me anyway, just aside from the technical task. So, all right, any other last, like, I gotta say it. Two. Okay, go for it. Who had their hand up? Brian said goodbye. Anybody else? Window closing. All right. I love you guys. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for giving me your time and your wisdom and sharing with us. And I hope to see you next time. I will send out a blog post announcement about the date and the new time. And we will continue this conversation. And Jenna will send out the slide deck to everybody as well. All right.